Here's a question I want you to sit with for just a moment. If someone asks you right now, in English, to explain what artificial intelligence actually is, not to recite a definition, but genuinely explain it the way you'd explain it to a smart friend over coffee, could you do it? Really? Because most people, even native speakers, reach for buzzwords and then sort of trail off. It's like machines learning stuff, and that's fine for casual moments, obviously, but we can do better. And today we're going to. All right, my friends, today's episode is about AI and the future of technology, but not as a tech lecture and definitely not as a doom scroll through apocalyptic predictions and the Terminator stuff. No. We're going to use this topic as a vehicle for something more important. Building the English you need to discuss complex, evolving ideas with clarity, with confidence, and with just enough nuance that people around you start leaning in when you talk. Now here's what we are covering today. We're covering powerful vocabulary for discussing AI and technology. We're covering grammatical structures for expressing uncertainty, possibility, and prediction. We are discussing speaking strategies for sounding informed even when you're not entirely sure. And of course, we're going to have a good dose of ideas and perspectives worth actually thinking about. So, are you ready to do that? Welcome to a new episode of English Plus with Danny. Let me start with a little story. A few years ago, a friend of mine, a doctor, very intelligent person, but not a tech person at all, came back from a medical conference and said to me, "Danny, I spent 2 days listening to people talk about AI in medicine, and I understood about 40% of what they said." Now, his English was fine. The problem wasn't the language level. The problem was the vocabulary, the specific field-related words that were flying around the room like they were obvious, like everyone should already know them. He felt left out. He felt, as he put it, behind. That feeling, being behind, is what vocabulary gaps create. So let's close some of those gaps right now. Let me start with the word algorithm. The word algorithm comes up constantly in AI discussions. An algorithm is essentially a set of instructions, a sequence of steps a computer follows to solve a problem or complete a task. Think of it like a recipe. A recipe tells you, first do this, then do that. If this happens, then do something else. An algorithm does the same thing, but for machines. Here's a useful phrase you can use. You can say, for example, at its core, an algorithm is just a set of rules a system follows. That phrase, at its core, is wonderful. It signals that you're about to simplify something complicated, and people appreciate that. Next, let's talk about machine learning. Well, this is where things get interesting. Machine learning is a type of AI where systems learn from data rather than being explicitly programmed for every situation. Instead of a programmer writing a rule for every possible scenario, the machine looks at thousands of examples and figures out the pattern itself. Now, here's a sentence structure worth borrowing. You can say, rather than being told exactly what to do, the system learns from patterns in the data. Notice the construction, rather than being told. Notice the construction, rather than being told, the system learns from. This is a sophisticated contrast structure that works beautifully in both speaking and writing. And now let's talk about neural networks. I know that sounds like something out of a science fiction novel, and honestly, it kind of is. A neural network is a computing system inspired by the structure of the human brain. Layers of connected nodes that process information. You don't need to understand the engineering. What you need is to be able to say something like, neural networks are modeled loosely on how the human brain processes information, which is part of what makes them so powerful and so unpredictable. That sentence? That sounds like someone who's read a book or two on the topic. Pretty good, right? So let's keep going. Here's a phrase that appears constantly: large language model, often abbreviated as LLM. Well, these are systems trained on enormous amounts of text that learn to predict and generate language. A useful way to describe it is by saying a large language model essentially learns the statistical patterns of language at an almost incomprehensible scale. The phrase "at an almost incomprehensible scale" is doing a lot of work there. It communicates magnitude without requiring you to cite specific numbers. And that, my friend, is a smart speaking move. Now I want to give you a quick task. I want you to pause for just a second and try to use one of these words: algorithm, machine learning, neural network, or large language model. I want you to use one of these words or phrases in a sentence that relates to your own life or work. Don't worry if it sounds awkward at first. The point is to activate the word, to make it yours rather than just something you recognized. You can pause the recording, you can do it, and when you're ready, let's move on. Now, one of the most important things you can do when discussing AI or any complex topic is to express degrees of certainty. Not everything about AI is known. Not everything is clear. And the ability to say, "I think," "it seems likely," or "there's some debate about this," actually makes you sound more credible, not less. Certainty when things are uncertain sounds naive. Nuance sounds intelligent. Now, here are some model verb structures for expressing possibility and prediction. We can say AI could fundamentally transform the way we work. This technology might solve problems we haven't even identified yet. Or we can say, it's likely that automation will affect certain industries more than others. And for expressing skepticism or caution, you can say, while AI shows enormous promise, there are legitimate concerns about this and that. And here, of course, you fill in the blank. That phrase, when you start with "while" and then you say there are legitimate concerns about whatever you want to talk about, is particularly useful because it allows you to acknowledge both sides without committing to either. It's the verbal equivalent of raising an eyebrow thoughtfully. Now let me tell you something about prediction language specifically, because it comes up constantly when people discuss technology. Now, there's a spectrum from very confident to very uncertain, and knowing where to place yourself on that spectrum is a real skill. On the confident end, you can say AI will reshape the job market. Or you can say within the next decade, we'll see this and that. Or there's no question that this will happen. In the middle, you can say it's reasonable to assume that something will happen. Or we might be entering an era where something happens. Or it wouldn't be surprising if something happens. That's all in the middle. Now, on the cautious end, you can go like, it remains to be seen whether this or that happens. You can say, there's still considerable uncertainty around this and that. Or you can say, predictions in this space have often turned out to be wrong, so I'll be careful not to say this and that. That last construction, predictions in this space have often turned out to be wrong, is a beautiful piece of epistemic humility, which is a fancy way of saying it's honest. And honesty in intellectual conversation is magnetic. So try to use it as much as you can, my friends. And now, let's talk about something that comes up every single time people discuss AI. Jobs. Will AI take jobs? Will it create jobs? Is it already doing both? This is a topic where you need both the language and the ideas. So let's try to build both. Let's talk first about the vocabulary you need here. You need words like automation, which is the use of technology to perform tasks previously done by humans. You can use words like displacement, and that is when workers lose their jobs because of technological change. You can use words like augmentation, And that is when technology enhances what humans can do rather than replacing them. You have words like reskilling, which is the process of learning new skills in response to changes in the job market. And notice how each of those words can be used in a sentence like this. For example, we can say, the fear of automation leading to widespread displacement has driven a global conversation about reskilling. That's one sentence. It is dense, I know, but it's clear. So let's unpack it. The fear of automation, that's a noun phrase as a subject. Leading to widespread displacement, that is a participle phrase giving us the cause. Has driven, well, that's the present perfect indicating ongoing relevance. A global conversation about reskilling, that's the object. That sentence structure, where a fear of concern drives or fuels or sparks a response, is extremely common in academic and professional English. And I know it's not the easiest sentence there is, but it is something you need if you want to take your English to the next level. And now let's move on to talk about something else. Here's a perspective worth thinking about. Many economists and technologists now talk about AI not as a replacement for human workers, but as a complement. And here notice that this word is complement, C-O-M-P-L-E-M-E-N-T, not complement, C-O-M-P-L-I-M-E-N-T. This complement with an E means something that completes or enhances something else. And this framing is important because it shifts the conversation from us versus the machines to how do we work better together with them. That's not naivety. That's strategic thinking. And being able to articulate that shift in English gives you an edge in any professional conversation. Now let's do another quick task here. Think of one job, maybe yours, someone you know, or just a job you can picture clearly. Now say out loud or write down one sentence about how AI might change that job. Try to use either automation, augmentation, or reskilling. Go ahead, do that, pause the episode, and I'll be here waiting for you. All right, now let's zoom out a little and talk about some of the broader language we need when discussing the future of technology more generally. Let me start with the word disruption. A disruption is one of the most overused words in tech circles, and it is useful if you know what it actually means. To disrupt an industry means to fundamentally change how it operates, often in ways that existing players weren't prepared for. For example, the streaming industry disrupted traditional television in ways that no one fully predicted. Useful structures here like X disrupts Y in ways that no one fully predicted. This expression is very useful because that last clause, in ways that no one fully predicted, is almost always true of real disruptions. So that was disruption. Next, let's talk about paradigm shift. A paradigm shift is another heavy hitter. A paradigm is a model, a framework, a way of seeing and doing things. A paradigm shift is when that whole framework changes. Galileo saying the Earth orbits the Sun was a paradigm shift. The internet was a paradigm shift. AI might be too. We may be in the middle of a paradigm shift in how humans interact with information. The phrase here, we may be in the middle of, is lovely. It places us inside the change, which is both more accurate and more interesting than describing it from the outside. I want to pause here and talk about a common mistake I hear when learners discuss technology. It is a grammar issue, and it is the confusion between affect and effect. Now, we say AI will affect the job market with an A, affect. A-F-F-E-C-T. Affect is a verb. But look at effect as a noun. AI will have a profound effect on the job market. E-F-F-E-C-T. Effect here is a noun. Now, these are so commonly mixed up that even some native speakers get them wrong. But in a professional setting, getting them right makes a difference. A simple way to remember, affect as a verb is the action. Effect as a noun is the end result. Let's talk about another common mistake. Saying technology is growing exponentially when you mean rapidly or significantly. I know that people love the word exponential, but they don't always use it correctly. Because, my friends, exponential growth has a specific mathematical meaning. It means growth that doubles at regular intervals. Saying something grows exponentially when you just mean fast is technically imprecise, though it's become so common that most people don't even notice. But if you're in a professional or academic context, using rapidly, dramatically, or at an unprecedented rate is both more accurate and more impressive. So don't use exponentially all the time, unless you really mean it. Now let's talk about a topic that sits at the intersection of technology and ethics: privacy and surveillance. Well, this is where the conversation often gets serious, and rightly so. The vocabulary here includes words like data harvesting, which is the large scale collection of personal information by companies or governments. We have phrases like surveillance capitalism, which is a term coined by scholar Shoshana Zuboff to describe the practice of turning personal data into a commodity. And there is algorithmic bias, and that is when AI systems reflect or amplify the prejudices present in the data they were trained on. The last one is particularly important and worth a moment here. If a machine learning system is trained on historical hiring data, and that historical data reflects decades of discrimination, the AI may perpetuate that discrimination. Not because it's biased in the human sense, but because it learned from biased inputs. A useful sentence here is something like, algorithmic bias is less about intentional discrimination and more about the unexamined assumptions embedded in training data. That sentence is sophisticated, but it is also accurate and the kind of thing that makes people stop and think. All right, we've covered a lot of ground. Let's think about how you actually use all of this in a real conversation. Imagine you're at a dinner party, or a work event, or a family gathering, wherever you find yourself, and someone says, "What do you think about AI? Is it going to take over everything?" Now, here's how a well-equipped English speaker handles that moment. First, don't panic and reach for a generic answer. Second, anchor your response with one specific idea. Something like, I think the more interesting question isn't whether AI will replace jobs, but how quickly people and institutions can adopt. The technology itself is almost beside the point. See what happened there? You've reframed the question, which is an advanced conversational move. You've shown that you've thought about this, and you've opened the door for further conversation. Another approach, use conditional. You say things like, if AI development continues at its current pace, and there's no reason to think it won't, then we're probably looking at some genuinely significant changes in how knowledge work gets done within the next 10 years. Conditionals, the if-then structures, are excellent for expressing nuanced positions because they acknowledge that outcomes depend on conditions. And a final conversational strategy, the pivot to the human. For example, what fascinates me about AI isn't the technology itself, but what it reveals about human intelligence, what it is, how it works, what makes it irreplaceable. That kind of pivot, it makes you the most interesting person in the room. Because everyone can talk about the machine, and not everyone can talk about what the machine teaches us about ourselves. That's special. So, here's your challenge for this episode. I want you to record yourself. You don't need professional settings to do that, just your phone. And even if you never listen back, no problem. I want you to record yourself answering this question in English. What do you think is the most important thing people misunderstand about AI? Aim for 60 to 90 seconds. Use at least 3 vocabulary items from today's episode. Don't script it, just talk. The goal isn't perfection here. The goal is activation. You've learned the words, now give them somewhere to live. My friends, AI is not going anywhere, and the conversation around it is not going anywhere either. But if you've been listening carefully today, neither is your ability to join that conversation thoughtfully, fluently, and on your own terms. Thank you very much for listening to another episode of English Plus with Danny. I'll see you again next time.